Alright. Well, today we are reacting to Games That Failed But Came Back from the Brink of Death by Rocket Sloth. So interesting. I saw the thumbnail, saw these three games. I played two of these games. I'm going to play Cyberpunk one of these days, but I really, I love Halo and I enjoyed Fallout 76 for what it was, even though it wasn't a true Fallout game. So I want to hear what he has to say about these. So yeah, let's enjoy his takes and his opinions on this.
Times in the gaming industry, we see game series rise to the top in popularity and reach the top of the industry just to have a colossal fall when the game loses the goodwill.
Halo Infinite has lost about 98% of its player base on Steam. Man, I can't believe they didn't put that split screen co-op in and didn't have online for the co-op
Of its fan base. Many games have reached the peak just to have their reputation destroyed, their player base dwindled, and the franchise seemingly killed. But every once in a while, there are those games that are able to pull themselves out of the mess that they've created and restore their reputation amongst the gaming community. I'll die on this hill. Cyberpunk 2077 was always a good game, flaws and all, but the explosive criticism it received when it came out, completely deserved. This game was originally announced all the way back in 2011 with mostly a concept trailer and the announcement that they would plan on making this Cyberpunk game sometime into the future. And in retrospect, 2011 was pretty early to announce this game, even if it was still just a conceptual idea. Now, of course, in the following years, we would see CD Projekt Red release The Witcher 3, which was a huge success. So, of course, the fans were excited to see what the developers would work on next. And when they first revealed Cyberpunk 2077 in more detail, it looked absolutely amazing. And, of course, the developer had a reputation of making good games, so, of course, there was going to be excitement about this project. Tie that together with an amazing CGI trailer that would later come out that was lengthy but built up the universe.
Samurai.
And just made fans really intrigued. Then Keanu Reeves signed onto the project, and he's like the most wholesome actor that there is. The marketing team for Cyberpunk 2077 was going
I wonder what the game would have been without Keanu. Like, he completely changed the game.
all gas, no brakes in the years leading up to when Cyberpunk was set to release. But one of the biggest offenses about this game by far was an over 1 hour long presentation on how advanced the world was supposed to be, what gameplay would look like, and what possibilities players would have to
Hold on, wait. Missing data, childhood hero, soldier of fortune, samurai, rock boy, Johnny Silverhand, Morgan Blackhand, Subaru, Arasaka. Interesting. Key life event, ran away from home, first big kill, death of a sibling, finished business, ex-lover in town, something to prove. So you could customize V more ways.
Influence the story of the game. Honestly, looking back at it in retrospect, it seemed like if CD Projekt Red had even an idea for a game, they were already publicly talking about it and announcing it to generate even more hype, even if the idea wasn't really viable to be implemented into the game realistically. I remember back even a few weeks before the game was released, CD Projekt Red was already talking about how microtransactions would be cosmetic only in a multiplayer standalone title that would release sometime later on.
Man, I am so sad that they axed that. I really love whenever they have multiplayer in games, and that would have been something to preoccupy the time for a lot longer. But unfortunately, they decided to just focus on the single player.
After the first Cyberpunk 2077 game, there was already a roadmap with the 2 DLC expansions that were supposed to
Free DLCs, next gen upgrade. Yeah, the only thing to come, actually no wait, all those came out. These 5 came out. No free DLCs. The next gen update, console update, came out.
Come out within a year of the game's launch. It was a lot, and they were very, very confident in the promises they were making to their player base. And even after multiple delays, when we were about to see the game release, it was all hype, and pre-orders were through the roof. As a fan of this aesthetic, I was so excited about this game. I thought that this would be like one of the biggest new franchises of all time, and I was so interested in it. I wanted to make videos talking about Cyberpunk 2077. I did this whole green screen setup where it looked like I had an apartment in Night City. Like, this was gonna be a really big thing I'd felt for the gaming industry. And then the game came out.
I love that.
Like, this was gonna be a really big thing I'd felt for the gaming industry. And then
the pantsless You can just drive around like that. Oh my god. All the videos I saw of the glitches, a bunch of hilarity.
Game came out. Day one, there were a ton of performance issues with Cyberpunk 2077.
Oh my god. PS2 games. Nah, not even PS2. PS1 games. Slash maybe the game's trying to be retro.
Especially on the last gen hardware. Like, the performance on the older generation systems were appalling, and mind you, the games were initially announced for these consoles. The PS5 and Xbox Series X and S had just come out at that time, so it's not like they were always developing the games with those hardware specs in mind. There was not the best optimization for a lot of PC players, and then of course a lot of the content that had been hyped up over the years wasn't actually.
You can beat the game in about 10 hours and clear the whole map in less than 40 hours. Character customization, nothing like they promised. You're not able to steer the drone you get from the Maelstrom gang. Reflex boosters and other boosters are not existential in the game. All the mini cutscenes like waking up after a night of fun, also not in the game. Interactive world, the most believable city, NPCs taking selfies, NPCs randomly talking to you, giving you the option to answer them.
A part of the game. There was still a strong campaign narrative to play through, but your decision making wasn't as branching as what they had advertised originally. The ways you could interact with the world were very limited, and then some mechanics you just expected to work well sometimes didn't, like vehicle driving or police chases. There's no surprise that all of those promises finally blew up in their faces because, yeah, they overhyped the game significantly. If they would have just accurately displayed what the game was, I think the game could have still been just as popular and would have had a positive response at launch, even with some of the jankiness in the performance. But it was a mix of the bad performance, the cut features, and the overhype that really just turned a ton of the fan base against the game. It even got to the point where the game would be delisted from certain stores and refund policies had exceptions made specifically for this game. Now, personally, I still love the game. Certain stores.
Hold on. Follow the abysmal performance issue on the base PS4. Xbox offers refunds, doesn't delist.
And refund policies had exceptions made specifically for this game. Now, personally, I still love the game. Through and through, day one, I was on an Xbox Series X, and there's no defending the myriad of promises that were not even remotely close to being included in the game, like getting to ride in the train. But how do you advertise an Xbox One X Cyberpunk Edition, once again, not a Series X, Xbox One X, and then the game can't even perform well enough onto that console? The backlash of launch was harsh, and it was a unique example of an objectively good game getting a lot of rightfully deserved criticism. The following months, though, would be very slow with Cyberpunk. Fixes were rolled out, and a lot of quality of life improvements were made to the game, but a lot of the core features that fans had wanted from the game wouldn't make its way into the game early enough. The time for those original story expansions came and went, and the next-gen upgrades ended up getting delayed. That whole multiplayer thing was scrapped, and there was almost radio silence from CD Projekt Red for a long time. I'd like to think that this was probably a humbling experience for a lot of the team working on the game, and while
I wonder what the alternative future is for all of that. Like, either Cyberpunk comes out as it is right now when it first launched, and then we get all that free stuff, a few fixes here and there, and like the free DLC, the multiplayer comes out. I was like, this probably would have been game of the century, maybe game of the decade.
public communication definitely wasn't the best, the game would eventually get patched up into a much more stable condition.
He missed the first nade and the guy was still stretching.
While public communication definitely wasn't the best, the game would eventually get patched up into a much more stable.
I thought this was like their preview footage again. But no, this is like normal footage.
Condition. And after that, its reputation would slowly begin to be restored, especially since the narrative and the world building are really good. This game is still special for a lot of people, and there is something great here. But then, a project that most people had completely forgotten about, announced years earlier, would finally release, and it would change the trajectory of Cyberpunk 2077 and its reputation moving forward. We're talking about Cyberpunk Edgerunners, an anime series released on Netflix, and damn, did this series hit right in the feels. The anime had a great story, but utilized the game world so well, and just ultimately was a great anime. And because of this, it sparked a ton of new interest in Cyberpunk.
Player count more than triples after the new update anime releases,
Pushing it to record-breaking numbers for a game that was already 2 years old at this point. And since the game finally had those quality of life changes, players were ready to re-experience the game and hyped again for what they did have in front of them, and I think a lot of people got.
And I still haven't watched Edgerunners, which, I mean, I want to rectify that, but I've seen a lot of clips, and so I kind of feel spoiled. And man, One day I'll get to it, but that song does bang, like lovey-dovey song, and some of the character designs I really like.
Got to experience that good game that was there released with the game. After the sales shot completely up with Cyberpunk and the release of Edge Runners, Cyberpunk 2077 has surpassed 20 million units of the game sold, and of course the new expansion featuring Idris Elba along with fixes to some of the bigger things that needed overhauling like the police AI, the future is looking bright. And after this, Cyberpunk 2 is set to be in development by
Sequel Project Orion confirmed by CD. Hopefully that one has the multiplayer.
one of CD Projekt Red's team, so hopefully they can continue on the right path. Now, Cyberpunk had the advantage, though, of still being an objectively good game with a lot of features, but what about a game that overpromised and delivered
animals that interact with each other in the environment? Asteroids practically only exist as a resource. Most planets have the same resources. Is this Starfield or no? This is a month or two. Starfield would have had to just release,
nothing
so
at
it's
all.
not.
We can look to No Man's Sky as an obvious
No Man's
example
Sky.
of this. No Man's Sky was developed by Hello Games, and they faced significant backlash at the launch of the game due essentially to unmet expectations and features that were promised but not delivered. Sound familiar? The game was initially marketed to unmet expectations and features that were promised but not delivered. Sound familiar?
I love that meme. First time, CD Projekt, Hello Games. How many times have Hello Games failed to put out a good project that they would ask again? Like, I'm not entirely sure about Hello Games and how many games they put out, but No Man's Sky is the only one that I know of theirs that's at least popular.
Familiar? The game was initially marketed with ambitious claims of a vast, procedurally generated universe with diverse planets, ecosystems, creatures, and deep
I bet they can kind of do that now with AI. Like, that can help with procedure
claims of a vast, procedurally generated universe.
Damn, I can't say that word. Generated, like, area and content and stuff like that. I'm sure AI can do something to help out with that.
With diverse planets, ecosystems, creatures, and deep exploration. However, upon its release in 2016, players discovered that many of those promised features were either absent or not fully realized in the way that things had been portrayed. This created a stark contrast between players' expectation and the reality of the game they got, leading to widespread disappointment. A stark contrast between players' expectation and the reality.
that dinosaur, it's made like a bull / horse. And it walks on two legs like a man.
Of the game that they got, leading to widespread disappointment and a negative reception. Like, look at this. Many of the features and mechanisms showcased in the promotional material and interviews leading up to the game's launch were not present in the initial release. The included features like multiplayer interactions, large-scale space battles, complex ecosystems, the list goes on here. Where were they? Tie that together with the limited gameplay loop that was featured here. Sure, the game had a strong foundation of exploration and resource gathering, but the gameplay loop itself was repetitive and lacked meaningful variety. The lack of engaging activities beyond exploration contributed to players feeling the game grew monotonous quickly. The game also suffered technical problems, including performance issues, crashes, and bugs that hindered the overall gaming experience. And then on top of that, there was the perception that Hello Games did not communicate effectively with players about the state of the game, the missing features, and the plans for updates and improvements for turning this thing around. The game was hyped up as one of the biggest and most revolutionary games, something fans expected to be a quadruple A title, just to be completely let down. However, despite the initial negative reception, Hello Games made a remarkable turnaround by committing to continuous development and improvement of No Man's Sky, and over the years following the launch, the development team released a series of substantial updates that gradually transformed the game into what players had initially envisioned. Hello Games used the criticism at least as a springboard for righting the ship and trying to get things in order, starting with things like transparency and communication. It was a big turning point when it seemed like a lot of the initial shortcomings were at least openly being discussed, and then from there, regular updates began with the game. After a while, developers released multiple major updates, each introducing significant new features, mechanics, and improvements like base building, improved graphics, land vehicles, more varied biomes, and an overhauled crafting system. The multiplayer was finally added, which was one of the biggest things that I think fans were really wanting from a game like this. And of course, it wasn't paywalled or put behind a sequel game that one day would release. They were all released as free updates, and I think the demonstration in the first couple of years really showed the player base that the developers were
Damn. The game looks really cool right now. I don't know what trailer this is, but all these effects and all these different biomes, just really awesome.
Committed to delivering a better experience even if the launch didn't live up to the expectation. Through those efforts, No
Giant
Man's Sky, a game
worms.
that was just panned so critically at launch, managed to survive and gradually transformed from a highly criticized title into a respected and enjoyable game. The updates not only fulfilled many of the initial promises, but also expanded the game beyond its original scope, and this impressive recovery serves as a testament to the power of post-launch support and dedication of developers to deliver on their promises. It also brings into question the ethics behind pre-ordering games.
Hey, here's an idea. Maybe stop pre-ordering video games. Life hack. Don't put down $60 until you know if it's any good. Yeah, I guess this is basically like the early access argument. Like, don't early access.
Games, giving money to developers before the game actually releases, and I think that's a common thread we'll see throughout this video. Okay, but what about a game franchise that already was massively popular, but then managed to cannibalize their own player base in practically one quick swoop? Halo, the Master Chief Collection. Okay, let's back up a little bit. Through the 2000s, Halo was on top of its game, easily the biggest FPS game of the decade, and the hype and excitement around a new game releasing was always a spectacle met by fanfare. Look at this. This is a picture of Luke and I, the guys who are on this channel. We've been pretty big Halo fans for a while, and when we were kids and teenagers, we each personally lived through the hype a new Halo release would have. Halo 3, I think of the whole Game Fuel thing Mountain Dew did, Times Square in New York having this huge Halo 3 launch event. It was a crazy time to be alive. People who had never even played Halo knew what Halo was because of how massive the game had become. You couldn't ignore the massive build-up to Halo 3 and the excitement that went with it. A couple years later, Halo 3 ODST was a smaller game that released, but boy oh boy, I remember pre-ordering this game at a Hollywood Video and practically playing through the campaign in one sitting while I had swine flu back in 2009. Then after that, Halo Reach had a ton of coverage on television, like G4 TV. Gamers were discussing with—
Man, I remember like living through most of that. I vaguely remember the Halo 3 hype. I remember seeing the commercials for Mountain Dew and Doritos and stuff like that. I didn't remember too much about Halo 3 ODST, but I did like play it sometime before Reach or during Reach. I just remember it having all the DLC, and so that was the main reason for getting Halo 3 ODST. Although it was a cool campaign as well. But man, the hype for Reach, that was like my favorite Halo game. Maybe 3, I don't know. One of those two was my favorite, but I have a lot of memories with Reach compared to 3.
what this game would look like. And then this commercial released. This amazing Halo Reach Deliver the Hope live-action commercial was on television, and it looked like one of the coolest pieces of sci-fi entertainment to ever be unveiled, maybe? Even Halo 4, despite the rise of digital sales being big, still saw a lot of fanfare for the release of this game at its launch in 2012. At that point, I was a senior in high school. I just got my license, and my local GameStop was doing a midnight launch at a pizza place on a school night. You know I was there. But a couple years earlier, after Halo Reach's release, you could tell the franchise was starting to shift in sentiment, sure, and specifically after Halo 4 was quite different from what fans expected, Xbox seemed to begin to fumble the ball with their brand when the big Xbox One announcement of 2013 left fans asking, what's going on here? Yeah, the Xbox One's announcement did not go well. It seemed like they were just demolished by the announcement of the PlayStation 4, and a lot of Xbox fans were planning and willing to jump ship to the party over at Sony. Xbox desperately needed a win, and at E3 2014, they pulled out all the stops and made possibly one of the best Halo announcements to date, the Master Chief Collection. Halo 1, 2, 3, and 4 all on one disc, all multiplayer maps, better performance and resolution for the Xbox One, along with Halo 2, a game that had its servers shut down 4 years earlier, would be getting extra love in a remaster and the multiplayer being brought back online. This would be the ultimate Halo experience for fans and would be a perfect entry point for new or younger players to enter the franchise. But then we got to the launch of the game, and despite a huge Halo Fest celebration live streamed coinciding the release, the game was an abysmal failure. Concerns started popping up 24 hours before the release of the game for most people who were tracking this game. I remember at that point I was a college sophomore in my dorm reading about some—
Man, I remember that night of the release. I was super excited to play Halo MCC. Like, I am still an Xbox fanboy if you've seen my channel. That's how I play most of my games. And so, sticking with the Xbox most of its life, being in the Xbox One era was just rough. Like, Jesus. Like, having no games because Microsoft wasn't focusing on games, and like even the games we were getting were like good to just okay. Nothing mind blowing, unlike Sony, that's making some pretty good games. Some games people would probably say are game of the decade or game of the year for those years, like the Spider-Man game or the God of War 4 reboot and Ghost of Tsushima and a couple other games like that. It's like, damn.
Some of the problems players in Australia who had gotten the game hours earlier before releases in the West were experiencing. There was a lot of discussion about serious matchmaking issues or something, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. When the game actually released, it was a mess. It was one of the worst functioning games I've ever personally experienced.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember living through this. I don't think my experience was as bad. I feel like I was getting in matches pretty regularly, but not like super quickly. Like a bunch of the times the matchmaking would fail. It's like we would fill up a lobby and then it would be like either error or it would just reset, which would be super disappointing when I was like, oh my god, I stayed up all night just to play this game. I think I was even streaming it as well.
And it was awful being such a dedicated Halo fan to experience the game in the absolute lowest state it had ever been in, which were those first couple of weeks in November 2014. There were a ton of matchmaking problems. That was one of the most glaring issues with the game's matchmaking system, which struggled to connect players to matches quickly and efficiently. Players had a lot of long wait times, there were failed matchmaking attempts, and a lot of the times you'd just be sitting there waiting to find a game and you would never find a game. Sometimes you get put into a game and the teams were completely imbalanced. The server instability didn't help. The game server
Oh yeah, I remember that too. The unbalanced teams and sometimes just getting squashed or doing the squishing.
were severe and had a lot of disconnections that were common. There were dropped games, there were issues with hit registration, frame rate drops, and other technical problems that impacted the gameplay. The game's party system, which would allow players to group up with friends, had its own problems, making it difficult to stay together as a group or join matches without disruptions. The user interface was a complete mess, and navigating
I wouldn't say that, but I kind of like the menus for MCC back then. I mean, right now, I don't know if it's that much more of an improvement, but I think it had its own unique style. Not as good as each of the individual games, but still its own style.
the menus were confusing, but also just a lot of the times didn't make any sense. And then there were the issues with the other parts of the game that you think wouldn't have problems, like you couldn't change your game type in Forge mode on Halo 3, meaning custom games from Halo 3 were completely killed right there. There were so many problems with the campaign, especially things in regards to progression tracking. And then there was the whole lack of communication, where it took literal years for 343 to really address what went wrong with the launch of this game, and it was pretty deep. The core systems of the game were broken. These problems collectively led to a disappointing launch experience for the Master Chief Collection. The issues were particularly significant because Halo MCC was intended to be a compilation of remastered versions of the first four mainline Halo games, and players were excited about reliving the iconic series, but due to the extent of the problems, the game's reputation suffered at launch. The following months wouldn't be the best. There were some updates being rolled out, but the issues in the game were well beyond something that could just be fixed up in a patch. As some sort of apology, Halo 3 ODST and a new map, which were likely planned as DLC, were given out to launch players for free, and
I'm just saying we'll release content and update all 10 episodes of CageofRage Experience.
While the series of patches did over time allow the game to function somewhat better, it would remain in a terrible state.
I don't know if this dude is playing on an Xbox Series X and Xbox One, or if he's playing on PC, but the like colors and grading on his gameplay for Halo 3 is just so weird.
Through most of 2015. 343 seemingly shifted their attention after that to Halo 5 Guardians, which would launch that year, and with its campaign not being good, like at all, and the multiplayer, while managing to hold on longer than expected for gameplay that was pretty different from anything that Halo had seen before.
I love Halo 5 Guardians multiplayer. People don't like it. I really liked it. It was different in a good way.
Halo 5 ended up turning even more people off to Halo than ever before. The years following Halo 5 Guardians are probably the lowest in interest that the franchise had ever seen. Halo Wars 2 would come out in 2017, sure, which was good for some Halo fans, but the core audience had nothing, and even worse, a really cool fan project to bring Halo 3 to PC was shut down right after release. It was just so hard to be a Halo fan. But then, in 2018, things kind of randomly changed. While it had been practically 4 years since MCC launched, Microsoft and 343 agreed that there was still a lot of potential with MCC, and with an eventual new Halo title to one-day release, maybe MCC always a good platform to keep interest in Halo alive longer term. So 343 announced their plans to begin flighting new fixes to the Master Chief Collection alongside a new partnership with development studio Splash Damage Games, who would work
I remember some of their games. I played some of their mobile games at Splash Damage.
on rebuilding much of the infrastructure of MCC across the board. Then in 2019, it was announced that Halo MCC would be coming to PC? What? And Halo Reach would be coming to Xbox and PC as well? That was huge. Now, don't get me wrong, the soft launch of each Halo MCC title on PC was a little bit rough at first, but the goodwill and sentiment started to grow that they were finally grasping what was wrong with Halo MCC and finally fulfilling those expectations that were set years and years before. And MCC would be built up over the following years to gain features like matchmaking composition, crossplay, different input supports. They added battle passes that were free and never expired that actually allowed you to earn cosmetics, you know, the way Halo was supposed to be played. They even added new cosmetics that weren't in the original games. Firefight support was added in, there were new Forge options, maps on the canceled Halo Online were put in there, and while functionality-wise the game's still not on new Forge options, maps on the
It's getting another DLC map from Halo Online, a remake of Turf called Icebox. Man, I remember Halo Online. I would be watching a Halo follower. I mean, if you know, you know. Halo follower, the one that would cover all the Halo games. I remember when they used to cover like rumors and other games, like following Halo Online, which was like a China exclusive Halo game that had literally everything that you could have wanted in a Halo game. It's like they had armor abilities from Halo Reach, they had equipment from Halo 3. You could customize all that stuff in the game. And that was just so amazing to see. Like all this stuff. They had exclusive weapons, exclusive maps. Like it just seemed like a dream game that Microsoft didn't want to bring over to America. And plus, I'm not entirely sure. I think it was just in beta in China, or if it was just exclusive to China.
canceled Halo Online were put in there, and while functionality-wise the game's still not 100% perfect, the improvement gained a ton of good faith towards 343 Industries and Halo, which helped drive a ton of interest for Halo Infinite when that game would release. The decision to resurrect MCC brought the game back from the brink, and now with the state Halo Infinite has been in so far, maybe it's time 343 Industries should take a look back at their old playbook and work on making games feature complete if they actually want to retain a player base. Halo Infinite has had some pretty hard times with its own issues and lack of content, but still, the franchise hasn't been so close to death as it was back at the terrible Xbox One MCC letdown days. Now, of course, a big part of Halo MCC was the multiplayer, and there's other games also.
The one thing I feel like he excluded from this was talking about Halo 5 more. Like he just gave it a little brief, tiny mention. It's like Halo 5, terrible story, like different multiplayer that some people stayed on longer. But what he fails to mention is that Halo 5 had a pretty decent like content cycle. Like they supported it for I don't know how long, a year and a half or 2 years of just updating it like every month, putting in new content. Like that's where the new Forge system came from, like newer vehicles being added into the game. Like all of that came from Halo 5, which he doesn't mention because that was the first time ever that a Halo game was doing that, of adding more stuff than just maps and like nothing else as content.
Also, that were more multiplayer focused that quickly would die off if the gameplay was rough, but one managed to survive where others died. We're talking about Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. Now, the Rainbow Six franchise.
I could have sworn Rainbow Six was like always popular. I mean, I know at some points it has like little low points because like patches and stuff are kind of whack by the community standards.
franchise had been around already for a long time, but this was a reboot that was focused on multiplayer and seemed like a natural evolution from something along the lines of Call of Duty Search and Destroy's formula, but a lot more advanced. When this game was revealed, it was promising, but upon its launch, it was plagued with issues. Believe it or not, I was a day one player all the way back in December 2015, and I was hooked. I played through the first year of content, and I've been there in the trenches since the beginning, and back then, it was a cool concept of a game, but man, things were rough. Hit detection, lighting, hit detection, glitches, weapon balancing, hit detection. Okay, there were some big issues. Also, griefing was a serious problem. I mean, it just seemed like if you lost a round, players were willing just to gun anyone down on their own team. Now, after its release, the player base did drop quite a bit, but stayed somewhat consistent, but the game never blew up into the numbers that other popular first-person shooter games hit. Through the end of year one, fans are actually unsure what would happen with this game after they fulfilled their promise of a year of content. And fans were pleasantly surprised to find that a second year of the game would be supported with a whole new season pass with new operators and maps? What? Mind you, this was back in a time where a game would release and be supported for just a year, and then that would be it. And then maybe a sequel would come out and you would buy that game instead. To see a game live beyond a one-year cycle was quite a bit different. But then, even more unexpectedly, midway through the second year, Ubisoft made the decision to pause new content and work on some of the underlying fundamental issues that were plaguing its game. This was called Operation Health.
Operation Health had been taking all the fixing several issues, investigating, and better technology to make sure we keep growing strong in the upcoming years. Is focused on 3 pillars: technical improvements, and a new deployment process on addressing the top community reported bugs.
And there's been many interviews years later where developers have talked about how Operation Health was a pivotal time for the Rainbow Six team in getting the game into a state where they could regularly fix and change things in the game to keep up with the ever-changing landscape of a game that has new operators being introduced regularly. Now, this did cause the game to see a bit of a player base decline temporarily. I mean, it was a large gap of time where there would be no new content, and the player base was kind of at an all-time low during this time. And then when Operation Health did finish, it didn't fix all of the problems overnight, but the game gave the developers the tools to make meaningful changes quickly moving forward, and that was what really was important. Then bam, the new content started up. There were 3 operators.
Operation Blood Orchid. So it's a carnival map. The 3rd season will be reworking operators following the optimization rework such as polished dynamic and static lightning, Riker Dome, and new customization. Yeah, I don't know when I started playing Rainbow Six. It was like during one of the free weekends. So either that was during like season 1, which I feel like during season 1 I thought it was pretty fun. I don't remember getting too frustrated with season 1 if it was during there, or at least during year 2, somewhere between that.
Released in the 3rd season, and 3 more operators released in the 4th season, which is quite a bit. Like, in a period of 4 months, the complete meta in-game had completely changed. And with that, there would be a pretty big influx of new players in the second half of year 2. Ubisoft now having the ability to make meaningful updates regularly kept players engaged longer, rather than stretches of dealing with broken situations that would frustrate players. Over the following years, Rainbow Six would see more growth before leveling out a bit, but if you look at the numbers, historically speaking, the player base has always been better off from year 2 as a turning point. Rainbow Six also popularized a multiplayer game having multiple seasons and supported for multiple years, and is now on year 8 with 4 seasons a year. Maybe you fell off this game years ago, but we can at least appreciate the decision that kept this game relevant, and also how it influenced other live service games to have new content released on a regular basis, rather than that abandon the game after a year model. Now, if you worried we weren't going to talk about Bethesda games, don't worry, they're not getting a pass here either. Now,
yeah, I was worried that they weren't going to get to this game.
Bethesda's known for crushing it with single-player stories, but whenever they've tried to dip their toes in online or multiplayer games, it's always a mess, and Bethesda and ZeniMax ran into some pretty big problems with the launches of Elder Scrolls Online and Fallout 76. Like, they are 0 for 2 when it comes to pivoting to online game franchises. Now, both of these games initially faced strong criticism and player backlash due to various issues. Elder Scrolls Online had a really troubled launch. Back in 2014, there were high expectations as an online version of the beloved single-player Elder Scrolls series was finally coming to life. We could experience this universe with our friends, the game was really exciting, but upon day one, there were a lot of problems. Like, first of all, the game kind of felt like it lacked a lot of the immersive and dynamic open world feelings that had defined the single player side of the game. There was a subscription model for Elder Scrolls Online, which required players to pay a monthly fee. This was extra jarring also on consoles because you're already paying for Xbox Live, and then you had to pay a fee for Elder Scrolls Online monthly as well. And of course, in the past, all Elder Scrolls games were just a pay once and you had access to everything type game. And then the game suffered from bugs, performance problems, and server instability at launch.
The one thing I feel like is some people are complain just to complain. Like, if they are promoting it as an MMO and then you start complaining that it's like, why the hell am I paying a subscription for this MMO game? It's like, what the hell? Don't you read?
Which also affected the overall gameplay experience, especially the players who were the most excited to play on day one. Now, of course, over the years, Bethesda and ZeniMax Online Studios addressed a lot of these concerns and made massive improvements, and I think that those changes substantially changed the course for Elder Scrolls Online. They changed away from the premium subscription model and switched to a buy-to-play model, allowing players to access the core game with just a one-time purchase. And then there was a lot of expansion content added into the game. There were new gameplay mechanics added, and there were more Elder Scrolls experiences that players were looking for added into the foundation that the original ESO was. Nowadays, when you look at the most popular MMOs that are out there, a lot of times Elder Scrolls Online make the top 5 or top 3 list, and I think nowadays the game's in a point where that is well deserved. Fallout 76 though was a whole other basket of problems. Launching in 2018, it was a multiplayer focused spin-off of the popular Fallout games, and there were a lot of criticisms here, mainly being the bland and boring story, the bugs and glitches, the game omitting human NPCs in favor of player-driven quests, which where you just looked at like a terminal for a while, and people just in general expected a new Fallout story that you could play with your friends, but this was not that. This was a shell of something that maybe looked like Fallout, but didn't feel like Fallout. Though, Bethesda has done a good job at turning things around for Fallout 76, and the player base now has a more dedicated community than what there was there on day one. It seems like things really started to turn around when the Wastelanders expansion released, which added in human NPCs and more traditional quests.
Although, the one thing about Fallout 76, like the failure of, I forget what it's called, but their battle royale map, like, man, that was the funnest thing to me, like being able to drop in wherever on the map and like find some power armor. I remember winning a few times during that mode. That was so fun. I can't believe they got rid of it. Like, I guess not enough people were playing it or something. I'm so sad. Why? Why can't people still play? Like, it should have been an optional mode that was still going. It didn't have to be something that, like, went on forever, but still allowing people to just play it since it's in their game. But yeah, I hope they add that apocalypse mode or whatever it's called back in one of these days. Like, I don't know in what year the Fallout 76 is in currently, but yeah, I really do hope it does make a comeback.
Structure, which was one of the biggest criticisms. It was a step in the right direction, but they still made some questionable decisions later on. I think one of the biggest things that is working for Fallout 76 is the fact that it gets regular updates, introducing new content, which features a lot of quality of life improvements. But there's also some free content that gets released as well, and it's just an effort to make this game more engaging over time. What about a game like Sea of Thieves, though, that was decently popular at the beginning and then fell off incredibly hard just weeks after its launch? Now, Sea of Thieves is interesting because conceptually, it was a solid idea for a game. It was kind of like Escape from Tarkov, but in the ocean, and pirates. Now the game had beautiful visuals, but there wasn't a lot to do on day one, and while fierce PvP combat was fun, it was overly reliant on PvE players existing to go and do quests and get loot, so PvP players could have loot to steal, and other players had players to run from and evade. It was the core idea of the game, but with few world events, Sea of Thieves was exhausting if you were an early on player, with a huge time commitment required to do anything, and then there not being that much variety in things to do. Things would slowly change with Sea of Thieves, with updates being rolled out. Developer Rare even added a PvP exclusive mode that kind of failed and was later shut down, but things really turned around years.
Like, I hate that. Why do developers do that? It's like they give the community a mode and take it away. It's like, just leave it optional for people, because now currently I don't have any way to play that mode. I played some of Sea of Thieves on Game Pass, but not that much. And it's like if I do ever get into it, I would want to try that mode and see what it's all about.
After the game had been out, when an internal effort to push content out on a more regular basis became a driving factor for the game. All of a sudden, there was content coming out on a seasonal basis instead of just a big yearly update. A crossover with Pirates of the Caribbean was announced. There were more customization added into the game, more quality of life improvements, and a ton of new events, quests, and puzzles that players could go on and experience. I've been a Sea of Thieves player on and off since the beginning, and I can firmly say that now
Hold on,
I've
I
been a
just
sea
I just
in a
want to see
ton
those
of new
guys.
events, quests, and puzzles that players could go.
I don't know if that's a new faction or a new armor set that you can have, but damn, that looks pretty badass. Yeah, mysterious like cult faction.
Experience. I've been a Sea of Thieves player on and off since the beginning, and I can firmly say that now has the most content that this game has ever had, but there's still some issues that need to seriously be addressed, like hit detection still being a problem all these years later. Nonetheless, despite how brutal and demoralizing this game can feel at times, it's a solid experience if you have the right group of people to play with. And now there's actual things to do and a progression system that is fun with its battle pass. Does anyone else remember how controversial Star Wars Battlefront 2 was? It was heavily criticized at launch for several reasons, most notably due to the controversies related to its progression system, microtransactions, and the perceived pay-to-win.
I can't believe they didn't learn from the first game. Like, they made an improvement with the second game, but not that much. They still had many glaring issues and still had a lot of terrible things in the second game.
Mechanics. That last one being one of the biggest points for Battlefront's reputation getting completely destroyed prior to the launch of the game. The game's loot box system, which allowed players to purchase in-game crates containing items that would impact gameplay, led to concerns that players could gain a competitive advantage by spending real money on loot boxes, creating this pay-to-win environment. But then the progression system was also tied to loot boxes, which also meant that players could improve their characters and abilities once again by shelling out money. This essentially undermined the sense of accomplishment through skill and gameplay, as progression was just heavily reliant on luck, microtransactions, and then also, if you're trying to level up the legitimate way, you're forced to fight against people who just threw money at their game. The backlash for Star Wars Battlefront 2 was one of the most severe and deserved responses from the gaming community maybe ever. When this game was on the verge of releasing, the idea of loot boxes and pay-to-win type experiences had been creeping up on a lot of different games, and to have a game, especially a game that wasn't even free to play, to have such an egregious pay-to-win environment, I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Leading up to the launch, EA announced that they would be taking steps to address the issues that players had, but I think the damage.
I'm glad I never paid for Star Wars Battlefront 2. I mean, I think it's on Game Pass, but the way I mostly play it is on PC via the Epic Game Store / Origin, since it was free for a while on there.
Was done already, but EA would eventually go in and remove the pay-to-win mechanics. Microtransactions that affected the gameplay were temporarily removed from the game, and progression was reworked to be based on player performance and in-game accomplishments rather than things like luck. The transparency and communication, though, moving forward after the launch of the game, addressed a lot of the concerns, and there were regular updates on the game's direction. And then on top of that, the game started receiving a lot of free content updates with new maps, characters, and game modes, which were actually really well done. And mind you, Star Wars Battlefront 2, despite all the criticism, was a visually beautiful game and really captured the essence of Star Wars. It was a game that Star Wars fans had probably wanted had the multiplayer side of things just been handled a lot better. Slowly over time, Star Wars Battlefront 2, though, with these updates, would see a rise in players that would consistently stay with the game. And over the course of the following year, while the game wasn't nearly as big as it could have potentially been, it still had a dedicated community that continuously played through the life of the updates that came with the game and still come back and play this game today. For how much backlash and hate the game received, the fact that the game's reputation did get somewhat restored through the following months is still a very unique story and why we wanted to include it on this list. And then one of the most interesting games to have ranging opinions about, and a game that literally had to die for its own chance to be reborn.
A realm reborn.
Final Fantasy XIV. Where do we even start with this one? When the original game released, it suffered technical issues, including poor performance, graphic optimization problems, of server instability. That, tied to the fact that there was a very unintuitive user interface that was considered difficult to navigate, left a lot of fans just incredibly frustrated. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. When it came to the game content, there really wasn't that much content, both in terms of endgame activities and just overall gameplay variety. The story itself was perceived as confusing and disconnected, which made it even harder for players to even want to keep putting time into this game, and it was pretty obvious that this game, for being an online MMO experience, was not going to last. So, in an unprecedented move, Square Enix went back to the drawing board and fully recognized the severity of the issues that the game had, and decided just like, hey, let's just go rebuild the game from the ground up. That never happens in the gaming industry. Essentially, this overhaul marked the release of Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, and this would be a re-release.
Yeah, out of all the games, basically this Final Fantasy is the only one that I don't have a like big say in. I think I bought it during one of the Steam summer sales, but aside from that, I have not played this. And so I do not have much to say about it. All I know is that the first version was pretty terrible by everyone's standards, and Realm Reborn has nothing but praise from everything I've seen. I mean, people still bitch and moan, about nerfs and changes, like buffs and stuff like that. But aside from that, they say that this revamp, reboot, whatever you want to call it, of the game is pretty good.
Of the game with improved technical performance, where it vastly improved on a lot of the problems that it originally had. It had better graphics, more stable servers, the UI was cleaned up completely, and then of course there was actual content that players were interested in. A robust array of content, really, an engaging storyline. There were dungeons, raids, and endgame activities that kept players entertained. The narrative was restructured to be more coherent and engaging, where player experiencing the game for the first time or playing hours in would have a positive experience and actually at least enjoy their time. The game also, this time around, was way more accessible for brand new players who maybe didn't have the most experience with the Final Fantasy games or genres or universe. A lot of the more complex mechanics were made more easily accessible through things like tutorials and explanations, and there were a lot of designs that lowered out the learning curve for brand new players jumping on board. Nowadays, Final Fantasy XIV is often critically praised and is one of the biggest MMOs of all time, but had Square Enix...
Also, one of the things I know about Final Fantasy 14 or whatever this one's called is that the modding community is kind of crazy in making nude mods and other type of mods for this game. It's like, my god. I thought like mods on MMOs like weren't possible, but apparently the Final Fantasy people, it very much is.
Not decided to just completely rebuild their game all over again, there was no way that original version of the game would have had a recovery as substantial as what we see nowadays when you look at Final Fantasy XIV. Maybe sometimes it's best to kill the game if you want it to live and succeed. So what did you guys think of our list?
Damn. I thought he was gonna say if you want it to reborn, but he flopped on that joke or didn't take that joke. That would have been the easy way.
We picked a handful of very unique examples to include in this video, and I'm sure there's other stories out there of games that have managed to pull themselves out of being on the brink of death. So if we missed a game that you think's worth looking into, leave it in the comments down below. A huge shout out to our patrons for all of the support. If you guys have a few bucks burning a hole in your pocket, you want to support more content like this, maybe check out the description and become a patron. Otherwise, that's it. Make sure you guys are subscribed for more videos, and we'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.
Alright, that one was pretty good. I enjoyed that. Yep. So, the video was Games That Failed But Came Back to Life from the Brink of Death by Rocket Sloth. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure to give them a like and subscribe to their channel if you guys did. But yeah, that one was a good one. I learned some things about some games that I did play, and I learned some things about games I never played. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, please make sure to follow me on all my social medias, like my Twitter, my Twitch, my YouTube, my DLive, my TikTok, my Kick, Rumble, Odyssey, and Dailymotion. Make sure to check out my second YouTube channel, and like and comment on all my videos, and even join my Discord. There you can stay up to date with everything I choose to do, where's my streams, videos, or anything else. But yeah, I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.